Let's get into another conversation now. The Debt Management Office put Nigeria's public debt by the end of June 2022 at 44.6 trillion naira. Well, this is excluding the government's indebtedness to the CBN to the tune of 22 trillion naira. With a forecast of economic recession and slow growth looming this year, it will be a double jeopardy to combine that with the weight of debt that will be taking away critical resources from the Treasury, according to analysts. Well, iBrandTV takes a look at what the next president of Nigeria must do with Nigeria's massive debt and debt service, both local and foreign. Now, joining us now for more analysis is Mr. David Adori. He is the Vice Chairman, High Cap Securities. He joins us via the telephone now. Thank you so much for your time, Prof. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Always a big pleasure being with you.
Okay. And I would like to say Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you and to all the viewers there.
Thank you so much. Now, let's get started. How worrisome is Nigeria's debt burden, and what are the likely outcomes of these if necessary measures are not taken to reverse the erosion of the nation's generated revenue? Now, for instance, federal government huge appetite for borrowing under the current regime had worsened the debt position of the country, as figure has risen to about 44.06 trillion naira as of September last year. So talk to us about this.
Okay, thank you very much. Once more, it's a pleasure being with you. But first, let me start by saying that both the federal government and state governments are heavily indebted. And from my own research and from the data available from Nigeria's official sources, as of September 2022, the total federal government debt was 67.8 trillion naira. And this is projected to rise to 77 trillion naira later this year, when 2023 budget deficit of about 11 trillion is added. And so, let me also let the viewers understand how precarious the situation is before we delve into the implications of this debt to the economic stability of the country. Now, the total federal government debt to GDP as of September 2022 was 35.2% of in fact, it was 35.2% of GDP. That is that the federal government debt was 35.2% of GDP. And it is therefore gradually inching towards the debt management office's 40% sustainability ceiling. Now, compare this to the ratio of revenue to GDP, which was 3.3% as of September 2022. So you can immediately see a very serious mismatch and gap there, that whereas debt to GDP is so high at 35.2%, but the revenue that is required to service this debt is only 3.3% of GDP. Now, let's look at the external debt situation. The external debt service ratio was 155.5% of oil revenue as of September 2022. It is important to note this scenario because the fund in hard currency required to service the external debt comes from oil revenue. And as of September, the amount required to service the external debt has already overwhelmed oil revenue by 55.5%. You see? So you can therefore say that federal government debt situation is precarious, the fiscal deficit is seriously preponderant. Okay. Now, going back memory lane, as at 2014, total federal government debt was 11.9 trillion naira.
Right.
And it ballooned to 67.8 trillion naira as of September 2022. And let's go back for that. When President Obasanjo was handing over in 2007, total federal government debt was only 3.3 trillion naira. And as we speak now, Nigeria is currently in a debt trap. What do we mean by debt trap? That is that the federal government requires to borrow new money, that is, take new debt to service existing debt. I'm not saying to pay existing debt
to service them.
To service the existing debt and also to finance his expenditure. And a lot of this precarious situation, a very prominent rating agency, Fitch, recently downgraded Nigeria's credit rating to B-, which is in the junk category. And being in the junk category, and because of this heavy indebtedness, it will be very difficult for the federal government to refinance existing debt in this 2023, because a lot of foreign creditors are now jittery and afraid of sovereign default because of this precarious situation. And indeed,
all right. Let me quickly.
Now,
yes.
Sorry.
Okay. All right.
What sends us immediately now is that in the first quarter of 2023, $500 million of Euro bonds will be due for repayment. Thank you.
So indeed, it's a precarious situation as you describe it. But so this is an issue before us. Now, let's look at the candidate. Election is before us in February, counting down to the presidential election in February. Now, one concern and the question on every lip of Nigerian, I mean on the lip of every Nigerian, it's how the coming administration can address the debt burden. So, like you painted, it's really, really alarming and it's of concern. So, let's talk about this presidential candidate. I mean, let's look at the top three, for instance. You have the Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi is there. You have the APC, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and of course you have Atiku for the PDP. And how well do you think they are concerned? Maybe we should look at their concern about the rising debt of this country, and what exactly do you think they are saying to address this? Do they have the knowledge to address it? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Peter Obi and former Vice President Atiku Abubakar are particularly seriously concerned about this debt burden and the debilitating impact it will have on the financial and economic stability of the country. But first, let me say that from their manifestos, all of them agree on subsidy removal in 2023. And this is also in conformity with the plan of the current budget to end the fuel subsidy, I think, by June this year. But let me start with Peter Obi's intentions. He plans to reduce cost of governance, undertake export-led production, and pursue exchange rate unification as his trial to manage the debt crisis. And then going to Vice President Atiku Abubakar of PDP, he plans to deregulate the economy and by so doing shift the burden of financing major activities in the economy from the public sector to the private sector. So that will reduce the propensity for borrowing and overtrading by the public sector. He also intends to undertake a lot of activities through public private sector partnership, and then bring a business approach to governance. Those are Atiku Abubakar's strategies. But however, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu has a weird plan for managing this debt crisis. First, he intends to continue the current practice of borrowing. And in fact, he intends as a strategy to increase borrowing and spending. And this is geared towards increasing economic activities that will generate more funds with which to handle debt servicing. He also intends to deepen gas revolution and promote exports as other two strategies to increasing revenue so as to tackle the debt crisis. So essentially those are summaries of the strategies that the major presidential candidates intend to adopt when they come into office.
Let's narrow down on each of them. For instance, the APC candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu talking about how to, revive earnings, revenue generation, and all of that. I mean, how does that go together? Spending, improve borrowing or increase borrowing with spending. Is that a solution in itself? Does that speak to that issue? And then, of course, you talk about the Labour Party, which also talk about reducing the cost of borrowing, cost of governance rather. Is this also a solution? Can that address the debt burden that we have at the moment? Because reducing the cost of governance perhaps is quite different from addressing revenue generation and also addressing the debt owed by itself. How can the country service it? And of course, you also talk about Atiku Abubakar as well. And so, how well do you think this idea speak to the issue?
Thank you very much. I think the strategies that these presidential candidates have put forward are generalized policies, really.
Right.
They don't concretely.
Hello, sir. Well, I guess we lost connection with Mr. David Adori, the Vice Chairman, High Cap Securities, talking to us on the knowledge of a presidential candidate, how well they are speaking to the issue of, debt burden, Nigeria's debt burden, which of course ballooning, at the high rate of more than 100% in the last 5-7 years. Of course, according to DMO, Nigeria's debt burden, of course, or the figure may rise to as high as 77 trillion naira. It's a concern among experts and economists as well. So let's quickly take a break. We will bring him on after this break. Please stay with us. Well, we'll have Mr. David Andori, Vice Chairman, High Cap Securities, joins us again. Thank you for your time. I needed to, finish on your thought before we look at some other issues on the program. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. So what I was saying was that if you look at the strategies which the major presidential candidates have put forward, they are generalized policies geared towards making the economy more robust, reducing the cost of governance, because this debt we are talking about is actually public debt owed by the federal government.
Right.
And so what they plan really is reducing the cost of governance, and then in terms of the area of causing the necessity for a high expenditure to disappear. And then secondly, they now also want to increase the capacity to earn revenue. So it's like burning the candle from both ends, using generalized strategies. But I have not seen any concrete plan from any of the presidential candidates.
Because I was going to ask you, which of these presidential candidates is speaking to the issue of, borrowing, the country's borrowing, and increasing the revenue generation capacity of the country at the moment?
Oh, okay. So what I said is that they are all concerned about the debt crisis.
Right.
But none of them has come up with a concrete plan to reducing the public debt. But my own thinking, when I'm talking of a concrete plan, is that you come up with a verifiable target, like an objective to reduce public debt by, say, 20% every year for the next 5 years through various policies like debt restructuring or outright payment. I have not heard that from any of the candidates. But it's very, very important that they start thinking about that, because the debt situation has reached an unsustainable and very dangerous level. Then secondly, they have, like I told you, put up generalized plans like articles intention to deregulate the economy so as to make it private sector driven. And if that happens, it means therefore that the financing burden that federal government currently shoulders will be passed over to the private sector. And so that will reduce the propensity of federal government to borrow henceforth. And then they are also talking about the economy, making it export-led. But export-led production, which is the target of Peter B., coupled with movement away from consumption to export-led production, is a general statement, because underneath it, a lot will have to be done to give the economy the necessary foundation for a production-based economy to be established in Nigeria, so that the economy will be internally self-regenerating, to be domesticated and import-dependent.
Okay.
That will require the development of the foundational engineering infrastructure that will make it possible for Nigeria to start producing machines, machinery and equipment, which is the first line. Some people will say this is like taking us to the vestiges of the first industrial revolution. But it's not going to be possible to leapfrog at all, because you need the capacity. If your intention is to industrialize and achieve import independence, which will reduce the pressure on your foreign exchange market, and then also lead export promotion, it means therefore that the economy must have the capacity to produce machinery, equipment, and their spare parts locally by having an engineering infrastructure. So if you cannot produce machines internally, which you actually require what we call an engineering infrastructure to do. An engineering infrastructure means that Nigeria must develop its mining industry to mine ferrous and non-ferrous metals, develop what we call STEM education, that is science, technical, engineering, and mathematics education, to have the prerequisite manpower to drive the domestic production of machinery and equipment. It therefore means that they have to still drill back now completely. So now talking about giving the economy that foundational backbone that will lead to export promotion and import independence. So they are not talking about that.
Okay. Yeah. I think those are the things we need to, focus in our next conversation when we bring you up again on the program. But let's wrap up now. Campaigns are getting intense everywhere. It's probably heated up because all the top 3 candidates are going about the last minute hour now to see how they can garner more support. what should they avoid in their campaign, especially with regards to fixing economic problem? Can we do that in 30 seconds as a wrap up?
Okay, so for the economic problem is affected by a lot of social dislocations, and beneath Nigeria's economic problem now is the pervasive insecurity that has damaged very severely the rural and agricultural economy. So the first thing those presidential candidates should be looking at is how to restore firm order in the rural and agricultural economy of Nigeria, so as to get agriculture back on track and get mining and other rural activities on track that will propel the economy. So they should be looking at that. And then they should also be looking at this debt crisis. So those are the two areas of vulnerabilities that they must focus on. But I don't really agree with Asiwaju Tinubu's thinking that further borrowing and excessive spending will solve the economic crisis that the country has been plunged into.
Okay. I think a good place to leave it. We'll definitely have this conversation again. Thank you so much, David Adonri. His Vice Chairman, High Cap Securities, have been talking to us on how the three candidates, the top three candidates rather, are addressing the issue of borrowing in Nigeria. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure being with you.
Thank you. Yeah. Still to come after the break. Well, are there hopes of improvement in the economic indices which experts have described as comatose with regards to the gross domestic product? That is the big question, and of course it's our next talking point on the show. This is Business Breakfast. Please stay with us.